Yeah, it's been a really interesting few years, just kind of making these interesting political alliances, these strange bedfellows, right? All of us together. I mean, I grew up in a family that was from Idaho, Democrats in Idaho, and Catholic Democrats in Idaho. So they were obviously big Kennedy fans. On my mom's side, they're refugees from Vietnam, and they're all Republicans. Um, and so it's, that, but interestingly, many on both sides of even them in my family agreed, that the pandemic had driven people crazy, that people were going overboard. My aunt was out there protesting down in Orange County, the lockdowns and the mandates. And, so there was a lot of resistance. And I wonder what it is that actually made people that way. And and I'm sure you've thought about it. What is it about those 30%? Is it that
Well,
maybe we lack emotion, and so we didn't get as afraid?
you know what? There was during the 1950s and 1960s and early 70s, the CIA did a lot of experiments with universities, with almost 200 universities around the country with social scientists to study human behavior, and they were experimenting with all kinds of things, with psychiatric drugs, with psychedelic drugs, LSD, etc., with torture, with sensory deprivation, and then all kinds of means for controlling not only individuals but entire populations with propaganda, fear, all these things. So you had all of these universities getting hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars from the CIA or from CIA front groups for programs that were called MK Ultra. The reason it's called MK is that was the code for mind control. So MK Dietrich, MK Ultra, MK Naomi, Operation Artichoke, Operation Bluebird, many others were all about funneling money to these universities to study controlling human behavior. And one of the famous studies was called the Milgram experiment. And Stanley Milgram, who was a Yale associate professor and who was associated with the MK Ultra program, took people from every walk of life, students, professors, business people, blacks, whites, etc., and he would put them in a room with a man dressed as a doctor, and they would be seated at a table with a dial in front of them, and the dial, they were told, was hooked up to a subject in the next room who, when they twisted that dial, that subject would get an electric shock. And the subject in the next room, they could hear him screaming and pleading and begging and struggling. And the higher they turned it up, the more screaming there was. And all of the people who were involved in the experiment at one time or another begged the doctor not to make them turn it up, but he kept telling them, turn it higher, turn it higher, turn it higher. 67% of them turned it to 250 watts, where it was marked potentially fatal. So they were violating their own values because a authority figure was telling them to do it. That order, that kind of respect for authority, got them to override their most fundamental values, compassion and kindness and mercy, etc. 33% of the people got up and walked out and said, I'm not going to do it. And I think that 33% that we're seeing now are the people who, that group in the population that may be from a whole range of political backgrounds and parties, who just has that, maintains that capacity for critical thinking and is not subject to being, to that override from authority. And it seems to me, it has struck me many times in the last year that we're all now in the grips of this huge Milgram experiment, where we have a doctor, Anthony Fauci, who is this trusted authority, who's telling us to do things that we know are wrong, like censor speech, like close all the churches in the country for a year with no scientific evidence, no citation, no public hearings, no public debate. Who's ordering us to put on masks, even though he admitted a week before that masks don't work. who's ordering us to close every business in the country, 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation, violation again of the Constitution, who's telling us to get rid of jury trials, the Sixth and Seventh Amendment, when it comes to injuries by companies that are, providing these countermeasures, like vaccine companies, no matter how negligent they are, no matter how reckless they are, no matter how grievous your injury, you can't sue them. And here's what the Seventh Amendment says. It says, no American shall be deprived of the right to a trial before a jury of his peers in cases or controversies exceeding $25 in value. So very simple. There is no pandemic exception. And by the way, there were numerous, the framers of the Constitution knew all about epidemics. There were two epidemics during the Revolutionary War, a malaria epidemic that disabled the armies of Virginia, a smallpox epidemic that literally froze the Army of New England while it was conquering Canada. They had already entered Montreal. And Canada, without that epidemic, would be part of the United States today. So, and then between the end of the revolution and the signing of the Constitution, there were epidemics in every city that killed tens of thousands of people: yellow fever, cholera, smallpox, and many others. So the framers knew all about it, but they didn't put an epidemic or pandemic exception in the United States Constitution. It's a new thing. We had a civil war and Lincoln at a time when our country was really, this far away from being destroyed. 669,000 Americans died. It's like, 20 million people died today. And yet when he tried to get rid of habeas corpus, the Supreme Court said you can't do that. There's no exception for war. There's no exception for, of course, there's no exception for pandemics. We had a Spanish flu pandemic in 1918 that killed 50 million people. And yet we did not stop the Constitution from functioning. So, this was a new thing. It made no sense when you looked at the science, but a certain number of people were susceptible to just saying, okay, we're going to do what we're told. People, when they're scared, fear is a really potent motivator. It's a potent instrument of totalitarian control. That's why Franklin Roosevelt, in his inaugural address, made this famous statement that was the mantra until the pandemic of the Democratic Party, which is the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. This is long before the war started. What he was saying is, there's an economic depression now, and the nations in Europe are abandoning democracy. A third of the people in our country thought that democracy and capitalism had failed and that we needed to go to another system. And in Germany, in Spain, in Italy, they moved to totalitarian fascism from democracy. Germany was the most democratic country in the world. In Russia, they moved to communism. All of them went to their own brands of totalitarianism because they were disillusioned with democracy and the capacity for democracy and capitalism to actually function. And Roosevelt did something different. He calmed the fears in this country. And he said, we're not going to be scared. That is the enemy. The fear is the enemy because it allows totalitarian systems to take control of people and destroy democracy and destroy institutions and values. And he said, we're not going to do that. We're going to methodically restore faith in Wall Street so that people take the money out of their mattresses, put it back in the banks, and start investing again. We're going to respect democracy. We're going to create jobs for people. We're going to heal the symptoms, and we're going to deal with it as a country. And we're going to do it in a way that respects the Constitution and our rights. And we're not going to allow anybody to take those things away from us. And unfortunately, the Democratic Party has lost a lot of that memory. All of that experience has gone into this memory hole. And we're living in a situation now that, I grew up reading George Orwell and Robert Heinlein and Aldous Huxley, and they're all writing these science fiction the stories, these wonderful science fiction novels that were kind of warnings about, a totalitarian system that would overwhelm democracy. So we all kind of had an idea that sometime in the great, great future, in the great distant future, that this would happen to our country. But I don't think any of us realized how close it was.
I want to tell you about Field of Greens before this weekend because I'm going to be drinking a lot of it over the weekend. Field of Greens is an excellent way to get all of your fruits and vegetables into your diet. So it's difficult for me to do it. I do it through Field of Greens. I drink a morning dose of it every day. And sometimes I drink it 2 or 3 times a day because I really do like that lemon lime. And I'm not lying about that. I really do. I like the lemon lime flavor. It tastes like iced green tea with lemon. I enjoy it. And while I'm drinking it, I don't feel bad. Like, oh, I'm drinking, an unhealthy soda or something. I'm drinking something that I know is actually feeding my body wonderful nutrients. Field of Greens is a powder of whole fruits and vegetables. There are no extracts. They really carefully select which fruits and vegetables they're putting into this product. They make sure they're getting not only the highest quality, but they're selecting the produce based on what nutrients it's going to bring to the formula. So you can ensure you're getting the best of the best when you choose Field of Greens. And I like the taste of it as well, like I said, of the lemon lime. I do have the regular also, and I do throw that into chocolate shakes, like my protein shake in the morning or something. And that kind of makes it like a raspberry or, it's a berry kind of taste. And I like that also. And I also will sprinkle the regular over like salads to just kind of give it an extra punch if I don't want to chop up a bunch of different vegetables and throw it in. If I'm being lazy, I just do greens, dressing, then I'll do sprinkle of Field of Greens on top, and boom, suddenly I have all the fruits and vegetables on that salad, and I didn't even have to chop anything. So go to fieldofgreens.com and get 15% off your first order by using the promo code Kim. That is fieldofgreens.com, promo code Kim to get 15% off your first order.